They called him the Man of Steel, but Joseph Stalin began life as an overlooked, impoverished boy in Georgia, expelled from seminary and branded a radical. Yet by 1953, his grip choked the Soviet Union and cost millions their lives. This is not just the story of how he seized power through cunning, bureaucracy, and raw brutality. It is how institutional safeguards failed at every turn. But what truly transformed a minor revolutionary into history's most feared autocrat? The answer begins long before the purges. Josef Jugashvili was born in the small town of Gori, Georgia, in December 1878. His father worked as a cobbler, his mother as a laundress, and the family struggled to get by. The Russian Empire ruled Georgia with a heavy hand, and young Josef grew up in a world marked by poverty, violence, and ethnic tension. At age 9, he entered the local church school, where he excelled in his studies and sang in the choir. This early promise led to a place at the Tiflis Theological Seminary, the highest educational institution most Georgian boys could hope for. By his late teens, the seminary had become a cage. Radical pamphlets and forbidden books circulated among students, and Josef was drawn to Marxist ideas. In 1899, after years of clashing with authorities and skipping classes to attend underground meetings, he was expelled. The official reason was poor attendance, but by then, he was already active in the revolutionary underground. He joined the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, operating under a series of aliases to avoid the ever-present Tsarist police. The streets of Tiflis and Batumi became his classroom. He organized strikes, distributed illegal newspapers, and built contacts among workers and intellectuals. Arrests and exile followed. In 1902, police caught him in Batumi and sent him to Siberia. He escaped, was recaptured, and sent back again. These cycles of arrest, escape, and return became routine. Each time, he learned new lessons in secrecy, discipline, and survival. By his mid-20s, Jugashvili had earned a reputation for reliability in the most dangerous assignments. He moved through revolutionary circles with caution, trusting few, and mastering the art of operating in the shadows. These years on the margins, dodging police, enduring exile, and organizing in secret, shaped the skills that would later make him a master of bureaucratic intrigue. The Communist Party's Central Committee created the post of General Secretary in April 1922. On paper, it was an administrative job, handling party paperwork, keeping minutes, and managing the flow of information. Joseph Stalin accepted the post with little fanfare, but the real power of the Secretariat lay in its control over the party's inner workings. Every appointment, transfer, and promotion crossed Stalin's desk. He oversaw the lists of party members, tracked their loyalty, and quietly shaped the ranks of Soviet leadership. Stalin's office maintained a card index system, thousands of files, each one a record of a party member's background, assignments, and reliability. The Org Bureau, a body created alongside the Secretariat, processed these files with mechanical precision. Stalin could recommend, delay, or block appointments, making him the gatekeeper for every position from provincial secretary to Politburo member. Those who wanted to rise in the party learned to seek his favor, while those who crossed him often found themselves stalled, demoted, or quietly removed from the lists. By 1923, the Secretariat had become the nerve center of the Soviet regime. Stalin's daily work was not dramatic, but it was relentless. He reviewed personnel files, issued directives, and built a network of subordinates who owed their careers to his decisions. The party's regional branches reported to Moscow, and Moscow reported to the Secretariat. Through this machinery, Stalin turned a routine office into the command post of the Communist Party. The levers of power, once scattered among committees and councils, now ran through a single desk: Stalin's desk. The card index system gave him more than information. It gave him control over the future of the party. As new members joined and old ones left, Stalin's influence grew, quietly but inexorably. The Secretariat, designed as an administrative office, became the engine of Stalin's rise and the foundation for a new kind of rule in the Soviet Union. Lenin's health collapsed in the last months of 1922. As he dictated his final thoughts, his wife Nadezhda Krupskaya and his secretary Maria Volodacheva recorded a series of notes, the document that would become known as Lenin's Testament. In it, Lenin warned of Stalin's rudeness and concentration of power, recommending his removal as general secretary. The testament was a direct threat, but Stalin moved quickly to neutralize it. When Krupskaya insisted the document be considered by the party, Stalin and his allies, Zinoviev and Kamenev among them, steered the response. At the 13th Party Congress in May 1924, the Central Committee arranged a separate, closed discussion. Delegates could read the testament but were forbidden to copy or circulate it. The Congress voted, with a clear majority, not to publish the document and to keep Stalin in office. The text was never read aloud to the entire party. Krupskaya's protest was overruled, and the testament vanished into the archives. With the threat contained, Stalin set about expanding his base. The Lenin enrollment campaign flooded the party with new members, over 500,000 in 2 years. Most were young, inexperienced, and dependent on the Secretariat for advancement. The old guard's warnings were drowned out by this new majority, whose loyalty was shaped by Stalin's patronage. Trotsky, once Lenin's closest lieutenant, became the most prominent voice of opposition. He joined forces with Zinoviev and Kamenev to form the United Opposition in 1926. Stalin responded by invoking the 1921 ban on factions, accusing his rivals of violating party unity. By 1927, the Central Committee expelled Trotsky and his allies. Trotsky was exiled from the Soviet Union. The vote was decisive. Stalin's control of the party machine left no room for dissent. The old Bolsheviks who had questioned his authority were sidelined or silenced, and the path to absolute power lay open. In 1928, Stalin launched the first 5-year plan, promising to turn the Soviet Union from a rural backwater into an industrial giant almost overnight. The blueprint demanded new factories, vast steel mills, and electrified cities. But the raw materials and food to fuel this transformation had to come from the countryside. The state ordered millions of peasants to give up their land and livestock, joining collective farms under government control. Resistance was immediate and widespread. Many farmers, labeled kulaks, tried to hide grain or slaughtered their animals rather than hand them over. Stalin's government responded with force. The OGPU secret police arrived in villages with quotas to fill and lists of households to punish. Entire communities were blacklisted for failing to meet impossible demands. Grain was seized at gunpoint, and those accused of sabotage faced arrest, deportation, or worse. Behind the scenes, Moscow's planners tracked every shipment and every ton. Industrial output soared on paper, but the cost was measured not just in statistics, but in hunger and fear across the countryside. The drive for rapid progress left little room for compromise. The machinery of the state pressed down on rural life, setting the stage for a crisis that would soon engulf Ukraine and other farming regions. Stalin's vision of a modern Soviet Union would be built with iron and steel, but also by breaking the backs of those who fed the nation. In the winter of 1932, Soviet authorities ordered the removal of over 4 million tons of grain from Ukraine. Ledgers from the time record 4.27 million tons extracted, a figure that far exceeded what local harvests could support. As quotas climbed, the OGPU enforced blacklists on entire villages, cutting them off from trade, food, and even seed for the next planting. These blacklisted communities were left to starve as punishment for failing to meet impossible demands. In the countryside, search brigades swept through homes, seizing not only grain but potatoes, vegetables, livestock, and anything edible. Resistance brought arrest or exile. The state's grip tightened further in January 1933, when Stalin and Molotov approved orders sealing Ukraine's borders. Armed patrols blocked roads and railways, trapping millions inside famine zones. Internal passport controls, enforced only in Ukraine and a few other regions, stopped families from fleeing to cities or neighboring republics in search of bread. Official correspondence from Ukrainian officials pleading for relief was met with silence or accusations of sabotage. While the government maintained grain exports to fund industrialization, food aid to starving regions was limited to a fraction of what was available. Cemetery books and local records show entire villages vanishing from the map. Death estimates for the Holodomor range from 3.5 to 7 million, with the true toll obscured by manipulated statistics and deliberate concealment. Survivor testimony describes the countryside emptied by hunger, with children and the elderly succumbing first. The famine scale and the machinery that enforced it left a scar on Ukraine that endures to this day. In 1936, Moscow's courtrooms became the stage for a new kind of terror. The first show trials put old Bolsheviks Zinoviev, Kamenev, and their allies on public display, confessing to crimes they had never committed. Under the harsh lights, they admitted to sabotage, conspiracy, and treason, their words shaped by threats, torture, and the ever-present fear of the NKVD. These confessions, broadcast across the country, sent a clear message: no one was beyond suspicion. Stalin watched as his former comrades were sentenced to death, their executions carried out swiftly. The machinery of repression moved beyond the party's old guard. Between 1937 and 1938, NKVD squads worked from lists signed by Stalin himself. In these 2 years alone, around 700,000 people were executed, including teachers, engineers, factory managers, and loyal party members swept up in the frenzy. The terror reached its peak with the purge of the Red Army. In June 1937, Marshal Mikhail Tukhachevsky, one of the Soviet Union's most respected military leaders, stood accused of plotting with foreign powers. The evidence was forged, some of it planted by Nazi intelligence and eagerly accepted by Stalin's secret police. Tukhachevsky and 7 other top generals were shot after a secret trial. The officer corps was gutted. 3 of 5 marshals, 13 of 15 army commanders, and thousands of lower-ranking officers vanished into prisons or graves. NKVD dossiers from the period are crowded with signatures: Yezhov, the chief of the secret police, and Stalin's own scrawled notes approving arrest after arrest. By 1938, the Soviet elite had been decimated. The Great Purge had reached its climax, leaving Stalin alone at the summit of power, surrounded by fear and silence. In August 1939, Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov and German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop signed a treaty that stunned the world. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, officially a non-aggression agreement, included a secret protocol that divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. The text, dry and bureaucratic, concealed a map that handed the Baltic states, eastern Poland, and parts of Romania to the Soviet Union, while granting Hitler free rein in western Poland. Stalin, watching events from the Kremlin, saw the pact as a chance to buy time and secure the USSR's western border. Within weeks, Soviet troops crossed into eastern Poland, following the German invasion from the west. The Red Army moved into Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, annexing them by the summer of 1940. Bessarabia and northern Bukovina, territories long claimed by Romania, also fell under Soviet control. For Stalin, these moves were not just about land, they were about creating a buffer against future threats. The treaty's secret clauses, known only to a handful of officials, set the stage for a collision between 2 totalitarian empires. As Europe slid into war, the Soviet Union expanded its reach, redrawing borders with the stroke of a pen and the march of armies, all while presenting itself as a neutral power. The uneasy peace would not last. At dawn on June 22, 1941, German forces launched Operation Barbarossa, sending over 3 million troops across the Soviet border. The surprise attack cut deep into Soviet territory, overwhelming border defenses and sending refugees streaming east. Stalin, caught off guard by the betrayal, hesitated to respond. For days, chaos reigned in Moscow as government ministries scrambled to evacuate. By the end of 1941, more than 1,500 factories, some dismantled bolt by bolt, had been loaded onto trains and shipped beyond the reach of German bombers. Nearly 17 million civilians and workers joined this exodus, leaving behind homes and fields for the industrial cities rising in the Urals and Siberia. As the Wehrmacht closed in on Leningrad, the city faced a siege that would last 872 days. Food supplies dwindled to almost nothing. By the winter of 1941 to 1942, bread rations dropped to as little as 125 grams per day. Official Soviet records counted 632,000 civilian deaths, but later studies pushed the toll to nearly 1 million, most from starvation. Despite the suffering, Leningrad's defenders held out, maintaining arms production and city defenses under constant bombardment. In the face of disaster, Soviet industry began to recover. By early 1942, the relocated factories were turning out tanks, planes, and artillery faster than before the war. The Red Army, battered by early losses and the legacy of purged officers, slowly regained its footing. The scale of sacrifice on the front lines and at home became the foundation for the Soviet Union's eventual fight back against the Nazi invasion. In the years after victory over Nazi Germany, Stalin's machinery of repression did not loosen its grip. The Gulag system swelled, swallowing millions accused of real or imagined crimes. Nowhere was this more brutal than Kolyma, a frozen territory on the edge of the Soviet Far East. Here, prisoners dug gold from permafrost and hacked at the wilderness to build the Kolyma Highway, known as the Road of Bones. Temperatures plunged to -60 degrees, and the dead were buried beneath the gravel, their bodies entombed in the road itself. Survivor accounts describe endless days and nights of labor, hunger, and cold. Official records estimate at least 150,000 deaths in Kolyma alone, though the true toll may never be known. Even as the Red Army paraded through Berlin and Soviet science claimed new triumphs, Stalin's paranoia deepened. In 1952, he ordered the arrest of dozens of doctors, many of them Jewish, accusing them of plotting to poison Soviet leaders. The so-called doctor's plot was built on forced confessions and torture, echoed in headlines and whispered in offices across Moscow. Plans for public trials and even mass deportations were drawn up in secret. The regime was poised for another purge. On March 5, 1953, Stalin died after suffering a stroke. The sudden end left a vacuum at the heart of Soviet power. In the weeks that followed, the accused doctors were quietly released. The machinery of terror paused, but the scars of repression ran deep, from the frozen camps of Kolyma to the corridors of the Kremlin. The shadow of unchecked power still shapes nations today. As authoritarian tactics evolve, the lessons of Stalin's regime in mass surveillance, disinformation, and fear remain alarmingly relevant. Nearly 3 million people perished in the Gulag system alone, a fact that warns against complacency. History doesn't repeat, but it echoes. The real test is whether we recognize those echoes before they become tomorrow's reality. Share your thoughts below.